Thanks for coming. I know you probably don't want to be here, but we appreciate you showing up. Just a couple things that I'm going to go over tonight. On the thing that I handed out, there's a little sheet. It asks for your name and what court you were sentenced out of. Make sure you fill that out, and then at the break, put it on the table. At the end of the night, you'll get a certificate, and you'll need to turn that in to the court that you were sentenced out of. Don't lose it. I won't give you another one, so you'll have to come back, take the class, and it's paid. So turn it in. There's also a survey that we asked you to fill out. Please just give us your feedback at the end of the night. It helps make this class better. Couple of ground rules. Please no hats, sunglasses, food, or drink, except water. No talking or gesturing. Please turn your cell phones off or to silent. And the money you pay tonight, that goes to survivors of domestic violence. We help with rent or really anything that someone might need. Like one client had her glasses smashed in an altercation, so we helped her get new glasses. So the money you're giving us isn't going into our pockets. It's going back out to help survivors. So we will start the night off with a 2-minute video. It can be kind of hard to hear, but we just like to get that little caveat, and then we'll get started.
On the 21st, 1991, time 22:13 hours. This will be a 911 call, position CT07.
Standing emergency. Standing emergency.
My mom and Debbie are having a fight.
Is he hitting her?
Stop it! Send the police, please.
Okay, we're going to be there. We're taking your
No.
Let me talk to you. Where's your mom?
What?
Fighting? What's going on?
They're having a fight because this is bingo forever and ever. They always have this because he has a cousin. He's always drinking beer and getting drunk. And Mom.
What's his name? What is his name? Your father's name?
He's my stepfather.
Okay, how old is he? What's going on? Lisa? Fighting? What's going on?
Hurting Mommy.
How's he hurting her?
He made his mommy.
Okay, don't cry. We're going to send the police.
Okay.
Okay, now where's your mother at right now?
She's in the room fighting with them. Okay, could you just send the police?
Yeah, they're on their way, but I'm going to keep you on the line until they get there, okay? Is your front door open?
Oh, no.
Okay, you go and lock it and come back to the phone so the officers can get in?
This way.
Okay.
He just knocked my sister out.
What sister that he knocked out?
My little sister.
You're
Oh, my God.
What's the matter?
Nothing happened. Just please send the police. Wait, I want to go see what happened, please.
Okay, the police are on their way, okay? Hello? Lisa? The police are on their way, okay?
Mama, the police are coming. My stepdaddy's got the baby now.
Yeah, where is he at now?
What?
Lisa, where? Hello?
So that is a real call. That was in the early 90s. Everyone did end up being okay, but we it's a hard video, but we do like to play it. Anyway, we like to play that, although it's hard. Lorraine Bond. She's worked with children and their families for her entire life. She worked in schools, at Big Brothers Big Sisters, licensed foster parents, and taught parenting classes. She has spent the last 5 years focusing on the effect of trauma on the developing brain.
Okay, this is going to be different for me. Can you hear me? Okay. Erin, I'm going to give her a second to get there. It is. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk to you about ACEs. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. This is going to be hard because I usually have.
I think you could put on a
Oh, good.
Oh,
That'd be easier.
You talk loud too.
I've noticed. Okay, so I started talking to people about adverse childhood experiences about 4 years ago. And I actually went to a training about it and when I started a brand new job. And I went back to my new job and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And the next week I started actually using it with clients. Less than a year after that, I went to a training with one of the doctors who actually created this study. And it was in order for me to learn how to be a presenter. And there were 20 of us chosen from across the state of Montana to be able to present this information. And, you know, I thought it was pretty cool. I was feeling really special. And they sent me the long presentation. And I went back to my office and I looked at it. And you know what? I understood myself for the very first time in my life. And it was really interesting because I had to go give a presentation almost the next day about it. And I kind of blasted the people in the room because I had learned so much. I was 62 years old, and I finally understood, because of adverse childhood experiences, why I've made all the crazy choices I've made in my life, and how it affected me, not only in the choices I make, but how my brain developed. So that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. This is a huge study. It was actually done with over 17,000 people, and it is scientifically accurate to the point that they can go to any place in the country and this information holds true for them. So in this, you get a score. Everybody in this room, actually everybody in the world has a score. That score ranges from 0 to 10. Here's how you get your score. In your packet of information, you were given, you want to just move me forward and I'll tell you when to change it? Okay, you were given something that says at the top of it, prior to your 18th birthday. I'm going to have you fill this out as we go through it. I'm going to read it. You're going to answer yes or no to these questions. Do not put your name on it. You're going to turn it in to me because we keep the statistics for these classes, but I don't want to know what your name is and what your score is because this is your personal information. So I'm going to read each one because in every classroom there's always somebody who doesn't read as well as others, and it just makes it a lot easier for us. So the first one is, did a parent or other adult in the household ever swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Yes or no? Now, if it's a yes, that's 1 point. Number 2, did a parent or other adult in the household ever push, grab, slap, or throw something at you? Or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Yes or no? Number 3, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touched their body in a sexual way? Or attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Yes or no? Number 4, did you ever feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Yes or no? 5, did you ever feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you? Or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Yes or no? 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced, or did one of them die? Yes or no? Number 7, was your mother or stepmother ever pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes, often, or very often, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or knife? Yes or no? 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic or who used street drugs? Could be prescription drugs. Yes or no? 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? Yes or no? And 10, did a household member go to prison? Yes or no? So what you do, every time that you answered yes, that's a 1. You count up those ones. That's your ACE score. Okay? So some of you are going to have 0 because some of you had really wonderful childhoods. Some of you may have a 10 because there was a lot of trauma in your childhood. Just so you know, I'm a 6. And that's important to know as you're thinking about how you make your decisions. Now, I forgot to ask a question in the beginning. How many of you have children? Okay, quite a few of you. How many of you live with a child, even if it's not your own? Okay. How many of you used to be a child? Yeah, you better all raise your hand. Okay, so here's the deal. These questions are about up to your 18th birthday. So this is what happened to you when you were a child. Erin, could you advance it? As your brain was developing. Because, what's going on is that trauma affects your brain. Now, when they did the study, they were looking at 3 different areas for people. They were looking at abuse. Okay, so physical, emotional, or sexual. They were looking at neglect, and that can be physical or emotional, but they were also looking at household dysfunction. So that was the other 5 questions, and that would be drug addiction, parents going to prison, etc. So how they got to these 10 questions, because they were doing a huge study, is that they asked people hundreds of questions. And what they were looking for is what's the 10 most common things that happen to people when they're children? And then how does that affect your life? So now, this is not all the trauma that you could have gone through. When I was little, I was really ill, okay, and I almost died. That is a trauma, but it's not common. So it's not on this questionnaire. So there might be other things that happen to you that will add to your traumas. Okay, so how does this actually affect you? When you are born, you have neural connections in your brain just like you do now, but you didn't have nearly as many. As you're growing, your brain starts making more and more connections depending on what kind of experiences you go through. Now, positive and negative, everything that happens to you causes your brain to make more connections. So that first picture is kind of what your brain looks like when you're born. The second picture is what a brain of a 6 or 7-year-old looks like. Because from the time that you are born till about 6 or 7, your brain makes more connections faster than any other time of your life. Okay, so everything that happens, you're learning. I mean, think about 2-year-olds. You drop an F-bomb around a 2-year-old. Grandma comes over. What does that 2-year-old say? They drop the F-bomb because they just have to hear it one time and they know it. For adults, you have to hear things about 3 times before you can really internalize it and start to use it. But 2-year-old brains work much better than ours do. So now the last one is pre-puberty. Okay, so your brain cannot keep developing at that rate, or it would be such a mass of connections that you would never get anything done. So once you hit about puberty and in your teen years, your brain starts cleaning out the connections that you don't use. So say you do everything you possibly can to avoid math class, and I was a math teacher, so I know people do this. Your brain, after a while, would start clearing out those connections because they would say, hey, if you don't need it, we might as well get rid of it. Well, that's what happens to a developing brain. So if you have a child who never experiences love, the brain starts clearing out the connections for how you react in those kind of situations. Erin, could you move it? Okay, so to further explain this, let's take 2 kids. You have one child and they live in a really nurturing, wonderful household. What that means for me, and I was a parenting teacher, is that when that child cries, someone goes to see what they need. So that child gets their needs met. That makes their world safe because they can count on the people in it. Now, because of that, there are lots of opportunities for that child. When things happen, they are able to focus on what could become because they don't have to worry about the other things around them because somebody's taking care of them. Now, this is a great thing for a child, but that means this child survives best when everything is going their way. Now, you take a second child and they live in a dangerous world. And they might live in a household where there's drug usage. They might live in a household where there's violence. They live in a household, though, where their needs are not being met. That's what makes a dangerous world for a child, is not having someone take care of them. They might lack self-worth. They're not going to feel very good about themselves. They might be hypervigilant. And we use that word a lot in my world, social work, but hypervigilant actually means that you are aware of what's going on you all the time. So that means you watch your own back. Okay, so you take that child, can you move it forward? You take that child and you send them to school after they've had a hard morning, or if you send them to school at all, school might be hard for them because they're so used to having to take care of themselves. They're so used to having to watch their own back that just telling them that you'll be safe at school does not mean they're safe at school. Okay? It means, darn, one more big scary person telling me what to do. So you send that child to school, they're hypervigilant. That means that they're looking around all the time to see what's going on, to see what the people around them are doing. They also might be turning around to see what's behind them because they have to watch their own back, right? So if a teacher sees a kid that's looking around all the time, do they just let him be? No, the teacher gets on them. Keep your eyes on your own paper, because they think you might be cheating. Pretty soon, if it goes on for long enough, the teacher is going to move that child to the front of the room where the teacher can keep their eyes on them. Well, guess what? Now all the trouble is behind them. Is that child going to be able to concentrate and look at the board? Are they going to be able to do well in school? No, because they have danger behind them. That's what their world has taught them, is that there's danger in all situations. Pretty soon that kid gets sent to the principal's office. Will the principal know what to do with them? Maybe not. Probably the lesser thing that could happen to them is they might be diagnosed with ADHD. Doesn't mean they have ADHD. It means their brain is developed in a way that other people that look at them think they have ADHD because they're hypervigilant. Okay, they might get put on drugs. Drugs are not going to help them because they don't have ADHD. Okay, so the world for this child that comes from a dangerous household might get tougher and tougher as they grow up. The other thing I want to say before we move on is that if that child has something happen to them in the morning, say this picture shows maybe dad yelling at the child, at a little boy. When that child goes to school, you know what can't happen? They can't learn. Because when you're upset, your brain actually shuts off. It works like this. Let me show you. This, when I talk about the brain, I use my hand because it's easier. All right, so if this is my brain, this part of my brain is called the limbic system. Really important for relationships and for memory. This part would be the cerebral cortex. That's your thinking part, right brain, left brain. It wraps around the rest of your brain. You know what happens when you're upset? You flip your lid. Okay? Your limbic system and your more primitive parts of your brain actually kick your rational brain out of the picture because they say, we don't have time for you. We can't be rational right now. So when that child who's been having to take care of themselves at home and wonder, what do I need to do to protect myself, gets to school, they don't automatically do this. They're still like this. And when your rational brain isn't functioning, it's impossible for you to learn something. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now the reason this happens is because your body produces this chemical called cortisol. We all have cortisol in us. It is very important. Women cannot give birth without cortisol. Cortisol is what gives them that extra energy to pump that baby out. But it is also what happens to us when we get stressed out. When this happens, when we flip our lid, cortisol is taken over. It's flooding our system. It's really giving us power, but it's also doing harm to us. What it does is it crosses the blood-brain barrier, so it can go into your brain, and not all things do. So for us, when we're older, we use that. You know, it's fight, flight, or freeze. We need it. But when you're little and it stays in your body for a long time, it actually becomes toxic to your brain. And when something is toxic, it means it changes what should be going on into something else that needs to be going on. Now, what it does is it aids your brain in adapting. Okay, so that child from the safe world, they're learning to adapt to a safe world. They probably don't have a lot of cortisol in their brain. The child from the dangerous world is learning to adapt to a dangerous world. That means they have a lot of cortisol. And it's changing their brain in a way that's going to help them survive. So, stay there. Okay, so part of what happens is you have sensitive areas, and that's why the brain changes. So your brain is constantly adapting as you're growing older, but it's not doing it at the same rate. So I talked about the limbic system, talked about the cerebral cortex. You have another part of your brain back here called the cerebellum. All three of those parts are changed by cortisol. Now, how it changes depends on how old you are, what your gender is, and what is happening to you. Now we can flip. And actually, we can just keep going because I already talked about that. Okay, so limbic system. I talked about that's memory and that's emotion. Well, what happens to somebody that when cortisol is going into their limbic system, it means it makes it harder for them to remember things. It also makes it harder for them to respond in an appropriate emotional way. Okay, the cerebellum, that is the part back here. That changes in this way. is that, okay, you ever been walking down the street and you're really watching the sidewalk ahead of you because you're making sure you're not tripping on cracks, but you also know what's going on, like you're getting close to an alley and you start checking out the alley. You don't even have to look down the alley. You have this thing called peripheral vision, and it helps you keep watch on what's around you. Well, your brain automatically does that, but that happens in your cerebellum. When I was talking about hypervigilance, that is that change that cortisol makes to the cerebellum, is that it may make you more aware of your surroundings. Okay, that could be a good thing. It's actually an advantage for people. Women need it because we actually need to check our surroundings far more often than men do. I don't know if you guys know that. Women are so far more attuned to what's happening in their surrounding areas. That is what we've learned. That is what our cerebellum helps us do. Now, cerebral cortex. Left brain has to be able to communicate with the right brain. So the reason for this is that different things are happening on different parts of your brain. So your language is on one side, your ability to work with numbers is on the other side. Well, you know what a child, either a little boy who was neglected when they were a baby or mistreated, and a little girl that was sexually abused when they were 7 to 10 years old, do you know what they have in common? No, I didn't either. They have the exact same kind of brain change, and that's that their right brain and their left brain may not be able to communicate very well. That is because of cortisol during the traumas that they were going through. The really hard thing about this is that you might have something that happened to you as an infant, but it may not show up until 9 or 13 years later, because that's when that part of the brain really kicks in. So things happen to us, we don't always know that it happened and that it changed our brain. And we don't find that out until we're kind of making crazy decisions sometimes. I'm talking about myself, not you. Okay, go. Okay, so what does this mean? In the short form, it means that what happens to you when you're a child impacts you over your entire lifespan. Erin, go again. Okay, really fast, let me explain this. There were 17,000 people in the original study. That was enough to apply it to everyone. What they found was that a lot of people said they had trauma happen to them. The most common trauma was physical abuse. 28% of the people said that they had been hit, etc., enough as a child that they considered it physical abuse. Now, you're the judge of that, not your parents. Your parents don't get to say, oh, that didn't hurt when I did that. You get to say, yes, it did. Okay? So if we put those numbers to Missoula County, we're just over 100,000. That would be like 28,000 people saying, yes, my parents hurt me enough when I was a child that I consider it physical abuse. So each one of those questions that I asked you has a number attached to it. Let's keep going. So just a review of that, there were 10 areas, okay? There were 3 under abuse, 2 under neglect, 5 under household dysfunction. Now, I gave everybody a number, or you gave it to yourself. I said I was a 6. Well, how many ACEs does it take to actually impact you?
1.
Well, 1, it can be, but 4 was actually what the study found. 4 puts you at risk for a lot of things. If you play cards, say you're playing poker, 4 aces is a really good hand. You know what? In life, 4 aces is the tipping point for when trouble can start. You okay? We can talk after this, okay? Okay. If you need to walk out for a minute, go ahead. Go ahead. Please don't leave. Let me talk to you after this. So there is a lot of risk that goes into this. One of them is early smoking. One can be alcohol. One can be liver disease from that alcohol. If you look at this chart, the lower column is what happens, the risk you have if you have one ACE. Look how the next columns jump up. That's the risk if you have 4 ACEs. So that's why I say 4 ACEs is the tipping point, because that's when things for you get riskier. Okay, that's when you don't have as much control over your life as you wish you did. Okay, so this is a class about family violence, so I need to spend 2 minutes on family violence. ACEs don't happen in a silo. If you have one ACE, you're more likely, in fact, 87% chance that you're going to have a second ACE. But if that one ACE is family violence, and the people in this study were actually looking at battered mothers, but abuse across the household, in fact, watching a sibling be abused is actually more impactful than any other kind. If that one ACE is family violence, there's a 48% chance that you're going to have 4 ACEs. Can you move it again? Here's how that works. If this chart, and I don't want to use a lot of charts because they're hard for you to see, but this chart is if nothing ever happened to you, if you never saw any violence, there is still a risk for you to have emotional abuse. There's still a risk for physical abuse. There's still a risk for sexual abuse. But the more often that you are exposed to family violence, that risk keeps climbing. And that dark line, that's the highest risk. Well, it makes perfect sense for emotional abuse. If someone in your household is getting beat up, that's going to feel like emotional abuse to you, right? Now, if someone in your house is getting beat up, the more often it happens, the higher the risk there is for you that that's going to happen to you too. But sexual abuse, I'm not accusing you of abusing your children sexually, but what I am saying is happening in your household is you're creating vulnerable children. And vulnerable children are prey for people that are looking for kids that they can abuse. And I worked with a woman who grew up with her father, who was pretty abusive, okay? And we were talking about positive touch and negative touch, and she started crying, and I had her leave the room. She came back later, and I said, let's talk about it. And she said, they don't get it. And, I was sitting there looking at her, and I said, I don't get it. Tell me what's going on. And she said, my dad never touched me. If he did touch me, it was, to hurt her. The only person, as she was growing up, that was tender with her was the person that sexually abused her from the ages of 9 to 14. That's what I mean by vulnerable children. They're looking for someone to be kind to them, and that just might be their abuser. Okay, so this is really hard stuff. It's hard to hear. It can be emotionally draining. You might feel like giving up if you have children. You might be going, okay, I've blown it for them. But that's not true. Remember how the brain is changing because of the things that happen to you? Well, it can change from negative, but it can change from positive. And in fact, a friend gave me a study that was on the effects of hope. And the best thing that you can give your child is hope. So if things have happened to them that you wish hadn't happened, you can go home and you can change the way you act around them. And for them, what that says is, if they can change, I can change. And that's giving them hope, and that's giving them a future. So you have a choice. You can pass on negative, you can pass on positive. But what I want you to remember is when you're raising children, it's about meeting their needs, meeting them in the healthiest way possible. As adults, we're supposed to protect kids from harm. That means even the harm that we've caused. Okay, it's your job as the parent to take care of them. And finally, I want you to think about how kids learn. Kids learn from watching the people around them. The best thing that you can do is actually be the person your child needs you to be. And that's their hope for the future. Thank you. If you have kids, I have information about parenting that I will hand out to you afterwards. There's a wonderful place in town that I used to work at. I'm on their board now, called The Parenting Place. I highly recommend their parenting classes. I think they're the best in town. There are also other places in town, so if someone else has said, no, go take this parenting class, take any parenting class that you can get. You won't regret it. Thank you.
Now we're gonna have Dave, little thing on email.
Yeah, that works. So my name's David Wilpong. I work with the CAVE program. I'm a domestic violence counselor. Everybody can see me behind the pole. Can you guys hear me all right? Good. Like Lorraine asked, how many in here are parents? How many with kids in the home? Okay. And how many people want to have healthy relationships? Awesome. I'm a part of that. Teaching domestic violence class, it's a very elementary thing that I don't think is taught to a lot of us, especially as men, is conflict resolution, right? How do we resolve conflict as men and some women? How do you do it? Physically?
And fight.
Fight, you leave, you scream, you throw things?
Yep.
Well, how did that work out?
Went to jail.
Went to jail, to come here. So one of the things I'm going to try and talk to you about as the night goes on is a timeout. Because as parents, it's very easy for us to impart that on our children, right? I have 2 kids. Well, some nights it's easier than others, but that's the idea, is you remove them from the conflict, the situation, and they go have a timeout, and their brain gets back online, like Lorraine was saying, right? And they're able to, like, stop throwing things, stop tantruming. Well, how is that any different for us as adults, has always been my question. Because we have tantrums too, it's just that we've learned socially that we kind of got to, like, keep it between the mustard and the mayonnaise. You follow me? So we have to practice our own timeouts. And what that means is when conflict occurs in relationships, right, there's 2 sides. 2 sides of that equation. What we have to do prior to that conflict occurring is we have to have basically what it boils down to, like a verbal contract, or in many cases a written contract of how that conflict, when it occurs, because it's going to happen, how we resolve that. And it's not in the moment of when the shit hits the fan that you say, like, I got to have a timeout, or you need a timeout, okay? It's ahead of time. You guys follow? Does that make sense to you? Because when things are heated and one person's brain is offline and the other person's right on the edge, and this person says, I need a timeout, and this person's feeling like they might be leaving me, what do you think is going to happen? Nothing good.
They're not going to respect the timeout. Not going to respect that person's need to have that space.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to pass it on to the next person, and then I'll come back with some more info and timelines. Thanks.
So our next speaker is Norma. She's here to share as a survivor of domestic violence. Her 30-plus year marriage ended in divorce after a near fatal assault. Norma is the mother of 3 beautiful daughters, 2 of whom are married to her loving sons-in-laws, and she is also a grandma to 9 healthy grandchildren. Norma enjoys a relationship with all of them. Together they are on a healing journey. Norma believes that we are all born hardwired for love, belonging, and struggle, that we all deserve love and safety. It is her hope to inspire you to do as her family is doing, making healthier choices and changing in ways that will help end the legacy of domestic violence. I will be interviewing Norma, so please welcome. All right, can you guys hear? Okay. Are you ready? I'm ready. Okay. So Norma, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood?
I always love it that Lorraine is before me because so much is explained in learning that there's like a generational thing here. So many people ask me how come you stayed, and there's a lot of answers right inside of the ACEs study because there's a lot of things that seem normal to us if we've been in a home like that, that's described. Um, that wouldn't be normal to just anyone or acceptable. So my history, a little bit about that is I was born in Detroit. I was the youngest of 4 children. Um, I had a brother that was 4 years older, a sister 7 years older, and a sister 10 years older. Being the youngest, well, it was difficult when my father died. I was 20 months old, and so I was kind of um, I remember from early times just feeling like a burden that my siblings took care of me a lot. My mother was a religious, hardworking woman that I think kind of got stuck in the anger phase of grief. So on the outside, we had really a strong image of respect amongst a large church of people and a neighborhood and schools. Um, but at home, there was some abuses that until my mother died in 2011, my siblings never called it abuse, and I rarely did either. We just said our mother was a slave driver and really rough on us, and that was kind of an understatement. I saw um, my siblings abused more than I was. My brother and sister, just up from me, really were like parent figures to me. My brother became my hero. Um, Even though he hurt me sometimes, just the sibling kind of thing that I thought was all normal, um, and is to some extent. He was my hero because he was what represented a man in my life, um, and so even though I had seen my oldest sister tackled on the basement floor and um, blood coming out of her mouth, and I had seen my sister that was more like my mother, like I don't mean more like my mother was, but she played a role in my life that was very much like a nurturing mom, and I had seen her have lots of things thrown at her, bruises on her face, but the time that stood out to me the most in my childhood concerning abuse was when my brother, who was in his early teens, um, was beaten black and blue by my mother with 2 belts folded in half and, and just like held down and then just beaten black and blue from top to bottom. And when he went to school, um, and he related this to me afterwards, and I was like 9 years old, and when he went to school that day and he got to gym class and he was told to disrobe, put on his gym clothes, he refused, and um the teacher just told him, the rules, you got to do it. And so when he started to And the teacher was able to see I mean, he was literally like black and blue on his whole backside. And I saw that myself personally. And so, when the teacher saw that, he took him out in the hall and said, "Put your clothes back on, first of all." And then he took him out in the hall and he said, "You don't have to go to class. Like, who did this to you? That was your mother. Like, I'm going to report her and we're going to do something about this." And he said, "No, no, no, I deserved it." Well, when he told that to me, of course, I thought that he believed that. And we had been taught by my mother that whatever we got, we deserved. And sometimes we deserved worse, she would say. But that wasn't the truth, but that was what she said that had been delivered to her from childhood, too. She had seen stuff like that herself. And so she was passing that legacy down unwittingly. And kind of her religious beliefs kind of even backed that up. And so it crushed me, it broke my heart, and it still sometimes really breaks my heart to think about my brother, who was like my hero and the father image in my life at the time. See him like that and to believe that he deserved that. And then I just thought, that's true. Like, we don't maybe know why we deserve it, but we must deserve it or we wouldn't get that. And so that was kind of that started me on this path of the way I thought of, where I felt somehow responsible for when my siblings would get hurt, even though I found out many years later that I didn't actually cause any of those things. I thought, because my mom sometimes said I was the instigator of something, and I just tried to please her and keep her happy and be funny and all that, but and stay out of her way when she was angry and keep her from getting angry. But I kind of developed that sense. It's an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, where I thought that a lot of that stuff was my fault and wondered what I did wrong. And that kind of played out for a long part of my life.
So that leads to, how did you meet your partner, and what were the first months and years like?
Well, when I was late in pubescence, my mother remarried to a stepfather that was a decent person. There was no addiction in my home, in my childhood home. Nobody ever drank a drop, but there was a lot of emotional abuse and a lot of negativity, and I just really looked forward. I mean, my mom went through times with my stepfather after a short time where she, wished she could die. I would be home alone with her because my siblings, being older, had all left home when I was pretty young, and I would talk her into living. Talk her into reasons why she shouldn't die, she shouldn't kill herself. And felt a lot of pressure once again, like I was the person like that felt really responsible for her and for her happiness. And so I just looked forward so much to the day that I could be married and could have my own family and have a happy family. And I just really thought it could be like the Brady Bunch, like if there's a father in the home, God knows, in those stories, anything could be solved in 30 minutes. And I had this fairy tale idea of, marriage, that as long as there was a father and a mother, that you could have a happy home. And so I didn't think it was a lofty goal, but it was a really lofty goal. And so along came a guy that was really my first boyfriend, and I was still 15 years old. I wasn't allowed to like date him till I was 16. But we had a lot in common, and I just enjoyed his adventurous spirit. He was a hardworking person like I was. He always was making money, so he could always take me to different places. I had a really overprotected small world, and the first thing that was important to me was, that we met at church, and he was all about God, and in my family, God and the church had kind of become a replacement for having a father. And so it was really a big deal to me that somebody was, all about God, all about growing and going forward. And it didn't take very long into our dating relationship that we shared our family secrets, which is pretty huge, you know, because pretty much every home has kind of this little code of don't talk about what goes on inside of the home. You know, we don't need anybody's help. You know, like we can handle anything that comes up as a family, and don't trust people to share that stuff with, because like my brother told me later, you know, he was afraid that we would be separated if my mother was reported. He was afraid that we would be taken out of the home. And there's kind of this underlying thing, you know, that I think most people have, that is kind of like keep it in the family. And so the fact that we could share our family secrets, and he had been through some abuses himself and had seen 2 divorces. And in his case, it was also not a man that he saw be violent so much as it was a woman, his mother. There was other women involved in both of these marriages that she had. And she made sure to beat them up or do other violent things. And she also was really rough on her kids at times. And he had seen a couple of acts of violence between his father and mother. And had had some violence in his home with his stepfather. He had gotten in trouble with the law already a little bit before I met him, but he had had kind of a blinding light experience with God the year before I met him, and so he was on the road to recovery and change, and we enjoyed a really active dating life, bicycling together, going out to eat to all kinds of new places that I had never tried, and going to church and church activities, and really formed, you know, a really deep bond, and decided to get married when we were really young. We were 18 and 19 when we got married.
So how did the violence start?
So actually, you know, I didn't acknowledge a lot of what I would think of as, you know, like rough patches. I didn't acknowledge that as abuse. Even in dating, there was a couple of instances of physical control that technically is abuse. And then because I felt that, you know, it was me and him against the world, and, you know, we were on the same path, and we had done a little bit of pre-marriage counseling because we knew that with broken homes, in my case, you know, my father had died, but in his case, he had seen divorce. He and I both were smart enough to know we didn't stand a chance. So we had done some counseling. We had learned a little bit about communication. And so these instances where he would get rough with me, you know, it might just be, you know, pushing, throwing things at me, pulling my hair, or pulling out lots of hair. You know, a lot of little things that weren't every day, of course. There was some rough times in the early years, but we, yeah, so I guess it started like early on, but the fact is, you know, like when we started having children, which was 5 years after we were married, we started our family, and all through those times, he was really good. You know, like we did so much together as a family. He was a good provider. There was years when I actually stayed at home, and was very dependent upon him, which probably had something to do with me sticking through some of those things that happened. But also because of my faith and beliefs, I thought that it was really important to forgive and forget. And I realized, you know, as time went on, forgiveness is really important. That's for our own hearts. But forgetting is really dangerous. And he would choose to forget very quickly. And he was kind of in and out of addiction, which was also a part of all of that. Always struggling, and with different addictions. But through the childbearing years, which my children are born, you know, 3 years apart from each other, And he would be on really good behavior for lots of that time. During that time, we moved more than once. We owned during the course of our marriage, we owned 12 different houses. We had owned a few different businesses, and I just always had a lot of hope, that when he would turn over a new leaf, or we would move in order to start fresh, that the violence part would end.
So how did the violence end?
Well, of course, before it ended, it escalated, and it wouldn't be as often, but it was more severe when it would come up. And to me, it was just like more severe in that there was children involved, and they didn't necessarily get hurt, but I recognized after a while that that it was really hard on them to experience seeing what was happening to me. And but there was a turning point. There was a couple of points at time, one where we were pretty isolated. We had lived in a few different states, and at one point we actually were living in Montana for a couple of years in the mid 90s. And there was he would often say before that he had never punched me, that he's not a wife beater. He had never punched me. He had never punched me in the face until a time when we were living very isolated. And of course, once he had left marks on my face like that, then he didn't want anyone to see me. And so my youngest was 4 at the time, and so pretty much we stayed in hiding. Like if a neighbor came to the door, because we did have some neighbors, and if anybody came to the door, or if we were expecting anyone, then me and the kids all went out on a hike or something, and basically were isolated and hiding. We didn't want anyone to know what was happening. So I was passing on to my kids, don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel like, just forgive and forget, like we can get over this. We can get past this. But the turning point was actually 10 years before the end of my marriage. And the turning point involved a time where we were living isolated in Michigan, in a place where we had built a house about 20 miles away from the business that we owned, and we're living, fairly isolated. 3 sides were state land, and he had, in the dark of night, shortly before. Well, actually, nobody was sleeping yet, but it was time to sleep, and there had not been a fight or an argument, but something changed, and in the dark of night, he had pushed me really hard out of the bed, and I had landed hard on the wood floor. And before I knew what was happening, because it very stunned, before I knew what was happening, he had picked me up and thrown me against a wall, and then was strangling me against a doorway. And when he let go for a moment, I managed to yell for help. And my kids somehow, between the ages of 7 and 14, had managed to sneak out of the house to the one house that was actually owned by his mother, for like an up north kind of house. But she wasn't there, but a family friend of ours, a young man, was staying there, and they actually were going over there to ask for his help for me. And so by the time they got back and came in the house, and he realized that they had gone out, I was in the living room floor, basically begging for my life. And he actually turned on my oldest daughter, and I didn't see what happened, but in her room, he had actually thrown her against the wall, and then come back to me, at which point the family friend is trying to calm him down from a distance. But, I saw something different in myself where I was just like acting like the self that I was when something like that was happening. And I was just saying, I'll be good, I'll be good, I'll be better, please stop, please stop. And then, as soon as everything was, and as soon as he was talking to the family friend, then I was back in the room comforting the girls and telling them that they had to forgive him and that I would be okay and that they should never put up with anything like that from a man. That that's not real love, and but that it's different for me and him. We really love each other and we'll be fine. That we grew up together, and so when all of that finally passed and everybody's asleep, I realized that I had not done anything to deserve that. And that was the first time that I really got that. Because previous to that, if he ever said, that I caused him to do those things, I would think, well, maybe I did say something, or maybe I triggered something in him, and I'm going to try harder. And I would try to think about where he was coming from and try to get inside his mind. But I wouldn't try to find out about me, like how to help me and why I would stay there and why I would, try so hard to make it all right. And so I was still with him another like 9 years after that, but that was definitely a turning point.
How has this affected your children?
So I'm going to tell a little bit about the last little part of our marriage, but I will talk a little bit about the effects on them. So before the end of the marriage, before the last couple of events, two of them had actually, by the time that my marriage ended, two of them had actually gotten married. Young, probably for similar reasons that I did, to escape that. Unpredictable, family life, because it could be so great, it could be so good, like doing everything together, hiking, traveling, having good, funny conversations, lots of good music, movies, like just lots of like quality time, but then lots of those times where it's just unpredictable. And where everything revolved around him and his anger and addictions and abuse. And one of the things that some of the effects on my children I didn't see until much later. At the time, I was so in it that I didn't relate what was happening to me physically or with them to what was being done in the home. And but a couple of them had actually gone through times of being cutters. And I realized later that was like their cry for help. And at one point when one of them had severely cut themselves, and I wanted to take her, to the hospital, it was a case of where nobody can know that she did this, so it didn't heal well. And I allowed myself, to be controlled. I felt like I had no choices. I know now I had choices, but I was so scared I didn't feel that I did. And they ultimately, they all have more aces than I do. So out of that ACEs score, I've learned a lot since I've been coming to this class and hearing about the ACEs. And, I have 5 ACEs. My children all have 6 and 7. And, I just want to say, for one thing, it's not a prediction and it's not an indictment. Because, it doesn't matter if we're standing up here with 1 or 5, like we can all do different things with that. And we can use it as a tool to propel ourselves forward and to just recognize that some of this stuff isn't our fault. You know, we might just have to work harder than other people do to overcome. But and then my now ex-husband had only probably 4 aces. So it's definitely not a prediction of how you turn out. But you know, they have all dealt with PTSD just like I have, and have gone in and out of bad relationships. A couple of them were as adults sexually abused as young adults, and so, you know, take to heart what Lorraine was teaching. It's true, you know, like vulnerable people end up being noted by predators. So the marriage basically came to an end because the last 6 months there was only my youngest left living at home, and actually she had been gone for a short time, and for some months, and so 6 months before the end of the marriage, there was, you know, a time where in the middle of the night when he got up to use the bathroom and I got up to get a glass of water, he was evidently in a blacked out state and, you know, came into the kitchen when I was getting a drink of water and just started, you know, beating on me, basically, you know, punching me so many times as I had never been punched, and was down on the floor just asking, you know, for him to quit. And then I thought that maybe I'd be able to escape out the front door if he got distracted or something, but I couldn't make it to the front door. And before I knew it, he had like his foot on top of my chest and was going to finish me off. But instead, all of a sudden, as he came down on me, he like came out of it and said, "What have I done? Oh my God, what have I done? What have I done?" He actually had a lot of remorse that time. I was really a mess. I was definitely hurt, definitely injured, and I promised that nobody would ever have to know. And went to work the next day, and he had actually helped me to do my makeup so that I could cover up some of it, but it was definitely like super obvious. And so I just made up a funny story about that. But he was so afraid that I was telling people. That was a turning point for him, because he was like, maybe I do need help. And he wanted to blame it all on addiction, not on just having, you know, like a bad temper, because he definitely had a bad temper, even though the actions and reactions may be worse with drinking and with drugs just because of lowering inhibitions. That was not the root of the issue, but he did go and get on some pills. And a short time after getting on a couple of different pills, he decided that he was more depressed. By then, my youngest daughter had moved back home, but and nobody was aware of what had actually happened to me. And so then, yeah, a short time later, he decided he was more depressed, and rather than go back to the doctor and talk about, you know, a change, he decided to drink along with doing all these pills. And the final event was basically where he had become delusional. And even though he followed me and stuff like that, he was afraid that I was planning my way out. I actually was not at all. I was praying for, you know, something to change, because I was scared and he was increasingly more dangerous. And I was more prepared by then, like I wouldn't take my shoes off and I would keep something behind the chair so that if I had to run out, I would have something with me in case I had to take off. But that night, you know, got pretty crazy, and then and I was home alone with him, and then he basically strangled me, and then let me go at the point that I was about to lose consciousness. And the reason why, I'm sure, is God. And so I just was like, thank you. And then I was in total shock and bruised up. And then he was going to trap me in the bedroom and lock the window and the door. But as he was locking the window, I did run, and he managed to get me back inside. But when he did, even though my phone was not working anymore, it was out of power and was plugged in. He he got a call from my daughter, who was having car trouble, and and so he gave me the phone, and he calmed down for a little bit, and so basically her and her friend came, and my kids, one of the effects was they had learned, like I had learned as a kid, in a whole different way. They had learned to create diversions, and kids should never have to feel responsible for their mother's safety or their father's safety, for any adult's safety. They should be so protected. And so they basically created a diversion where I was able to run out the door, and there was a whole fight that ensued. But fortunately, we lived close to a trail here in Missoula, and somebody coming off of the trail called 911. One thing I had never done was call 911, nor had my kids, and that had been really drilled into us to never call 911. But that night, I was super grateful for police, and it saved my life that somebody called 911.
And can you tell us where Jack is now?
So, yeah, one of the big effects was that as a result of that, he went to prison. I divorced him when he was in prison, and a short time later, well, not a short time, he spent almost 5 years with jail and prison. He spent almost 5 years for that incident. It was his first incident on record, because I had never reported anything. And I like to think of this. I know a lot of times when people come to a class like this, I know what I would feel like on that side. I would feel like, a victim in some ways. And I think we're all victims of our own choices. But, the fact is, this is actually like such a positive thing that somebody in this county also, providing this class, like that you get an opportunity to come to it, because there's so much compassion here. There's so many people that want to help those of us that are on either side of this to end this legacy. And so, my now ex-husband actually got out of prison here in Montana, and to stay out of trouble concerning me. Then he went to Michigan with family, but in a short time, when he finally was on his own, he assaulted someone else. He assaulted a landlord, actually, and he's still in prison. So for a man that started out, wanting, a very different family than what he was raised with, he really wanted to make good on it, and he, was a good provider. He up until, the last few years, when he escalated down and lost everything, or he spiraled down rather and lost everything. He had maintained, a lot of decent relationships, but he kind of burnt all of his bridges at this point, and he doesn't have relationships with any of his family or grandkids. And I mean, I have 9 grandkids now. He only met the ones that were born up to that point in time, which was like 3 of them. And, you know, none of us in my family get any satisfaction out of seeing him in prison, because it's the loss of a life, you know. And he was very much an artist, very passionate about everything that he was into. So many good points about him, very intelligent person, made a lot of bad choices, and couldn't own it. And I guess if there was one thing I would want to leave you with, it's that there's always, where there's life, there's hope. And you don't have to end up like him, you know, like this is like a chance, like the secrecy is what keeps the shame growing. And the fact that the secret's out and that you're on one side of this or the other, you know, that in itself can be really a part of the healing. You know, it can be like a turning point, where you think about, you know, hey, which way do I want to go with this? And so whatever part we play in these relationships in our life, because we all have a little control freak in us, you know, if we can own our part and do our part, we can change the legacy and we can make a better future for our children and our children's children. With me, my kids, my grandkids, we all talk openly about this. We've all gone through trauma therapy, the majority of us. Even half of my grandkids have gone through trauma therapy. We're all learning new tools. You know, I was 50 when my marriage ended, and I still had a lot of life in me and a lot to learn. And so you too can make those choices to change and make a better place for yourselves. And, you know, it's just like, this is my way of giving back and helping to end that legacy. And I hope someday that you're on this side of it too, giving back and helping other people to overcome their backgrounds.
Thank you. We are going to take a quick break, about 5 minutes, and we'll finish up.
We're in the home stretch. So, because I'm a counselor, I'm going to ask you guys to think about your feelings, your emotions, because that's what counselors do, trying to get you in touch with your inner self. Part of owning, like Norma was talking about, owning our stuff, owning our shit, is owning your emotions in the midst of the conflict and in our relationships. Does that make sense? Do you guys follow me? So thinking about, in conflict, where your aggression lies in your body, how it manifests in your body, where you feel it. Some people, their neck gets red. Some people, their fists, their palms get sweaty. They clench their fists. They grit their teeth. Their muscles get tense. You guys able to connect with what I'm saying? Anybody ever felt any of those things? Yes, at least 1, 2 people. Thank you. Some people pace. That's a sign that you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself, all right? Because diverting that train before you do something stupid and stick your head in your butt is what this is all about, right? It's about emotional, physiological awareness so that you're not ending up with the cops coming to your house. Does that make sense? So you might not be able to recognize the verbal cues of the conflict, because that may be an established norm. But if you can learn to recognize the physiological clues that you're carrying into conflict, that's one step. And then other step being the words that are coming out of your mouth. All of the nasty, like the big 5, as George Carlin used to talk about, not good, not leading you into a healthy place. Throwing things, not leading you to a healthy place. So the idea being, with the timeout, recognizing and modeling that for our kids, A. B, doing it, okay? The words, the throwing things, potentially. Physiological response to the conflict. And backing away from that, okay? Does that make sense? In this classroom, it makes perfect sense. When you guys are in your relationships, it's going to be a lot harder. So how do we initiate a timeout? You like do one of these and say I'm taking a timeout? We have agreed that we're going to remove ourselves from the conflict, right? In my relationship, I would maybe simply say, like, I just need a timeout. I need 5 minutes. I need to go for a walk around the block with the dog. I need an hour, right? I need 2 hours, however it would work. That's my language with my wife. Your all's task is to figure out if you need to do like one of these, like literally, like timeout. If you need to have like a safe word, bananas, cheese, whatever it can be, so that there's a clue for the other person and for yourself that you need to disengage. Simple enough, right? Simple enough in this room. But in the moment, we think back to what Lorraine was talking about with our brains, when you're starting to go offline, recognizing, again, being in our bodies, recognizing the words that we're using, thinking, okay, wait a minute. I know that one counselor guy was talking in that class. He said, I got to like think about my feelings, be in my body. What words am I using? What are the clues that are coming out that I'm kind of getting ready to be an asshole? And I need to like back out of it. Does that make sense? And we can model the same stuff to our children because they have those same behaviors going on. Not the exact same behavior. Don't jump on me. But we see it with children too, right? We can see when our kids are getting ready to go offline, can we not? The hard part is teaching ourselves to recognize that. Make sense? Awesome. John?
All right, everybody, this is John. And so, John, tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Okay, so I was born in Amarillo, Texas, in 1958. My mom was a nurse, and my dad was a sergeant in the Army. I don't have how memory is. My dad went over to Vietnam in 1960 with the first load of sergeants that went over as advisors. And so I really don't have any memory specific to him until he had gotten hurt in a parachute in a training exercise and came back on convalescent leave. Actually, he was discharged from the military. Did not expect to go back in. His whole left side is pinned together. He worked really hard, got himself in to where he could pass the physical, re-upped, and went back to Vietnam in 1963 and stayed there until 1972. Yeah.
There's like a family secret. No.
Oh, there's all kinds of family secrets. You guys will have to excuse me. This is really difficult. This is not a fun story to tell. My dad and my mom married twice. Obviously, I was tiny. I don't remember it. I have snippet memories of my mom and other women, but I never. The family. The reason that everything happened was because my mom was gay, and she had girlfriends. And anytime my dad was, out of the picture for any extended period of time, that's what he always came home to. Now, I didn't learn any of this until I was 18. It was a closely guarded secrets what the real reasons were for everything. My dad, when I had just turned 6 years old, and my brother was 4, and my dad told my mom that he was taking us out for ice cream. I have really good memory of this. He told us he was taking us out for ice cream. This was in Elk City, Oklahoma, and he put me and my brother on a Greyhound bus with one of his military friends as a chaperone. And 6 days later, we were in Missoula, and my dad was actually back in Vietnam in 3 days. And my dad was just taking advantage of the situation as it presented himself. It was the early '60s in the deep South, and he knew that if he could get out of the country and get us someplace where we were safe, that no judge in the country was going to take the kids away from the war hero dad and give them back to the lesbian mom. And my mom knew that too. And I blame my mom for a long time for not doing more or seeming to try to rescue us or anything. But she also was very aware of the situation and what her abilities were going to be. And so she didn't put up too much of a fight. She had a lot of trust in my grandparents, and she knew that we would be safe. And so the message that what we were told was that Dad, was just doing what was right, and that we were better off with him and with us, and that our mom wasn't safe to be around. And that was really all we were ever told about it.
You had some anger towards your brother.
Well, so the trip was a really interesting thing. So if this was the bench to the seat, my feet came to about here. I was 6. I've got a picture in my phone of the first day in Missoula. And I look at that picture sometimes and I can see what happened to me. Right? I did the best I could to keep my brother from crying, but what really happened is he cried for 6 days. He didn't stop crying until my grandpa picked him up when we were in Missoula. And so I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was poke and push and pull and make jokes and do what I could to try to comfort my brother. I know now that's where my dysfunction was born and where it grew. I was 6. I should have been crying too. I mean, I remember thinking, I had a mom and a dad, and now I don't got either. And what I know now is that was the first time I ever made a full and complete, disassociation from life. And I made it worse. We came in and it was dark when we got in, and a taxi came and picked us up. I never saw my dad's friend again. He did not get in the taxi with us. He gave the taxi driver money and a slip of paper, and the taxi brought us to 111 East Kent. And that's when I met my grandparents for the first time. A little tiny woman and a great big man. And the great big man picked up my brother and he stopped crying. I was really grateful for that. And then the woman asked me, how was the trip? And I said it was fine. It was fine.
Well, do you want to skip to your part, how you met your partner?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, since we're kind of timed out here. So, well, there's some other stuff that's important.
Yeah,
I'll try to get through it quick. So 0 to 18, is kind of a like we learned. I got a 7 score, 7 on the ACEs score. Never heard about it until I did this class. And like Norma said, it explained a lot. Wherever we went, the primary thing that happened in there is that I no longer trusted any adults in my life. None. And I never did again. I became the decider in my own life when I was 6 years old. And I would play with you, and I would play your games, and I would do what it was. I'm not stupid. I understood the benefit of going along with things, and that. But when it came down to the things that were really important, I put that on me. I started shoveling sidewalks and mowing lawns when I was 8 years old. I always had my own money. I didn't want to have to ask for things. That was the thing that would follow me for the rest of my life. I'm horrible about asking for help. I'm really good at giving it, but I don't need it. So we got moved around a lot. There was George and Patsy and Uncle Ralph and Aunt Nell and my grandparents. The most stable part of 0 to 18 was the 7 years I spent here in Missoula with my grandparents. I went to grade school at Washington Grade School, and that was the best part of my childhood. We did, I did, as you know, I was a smart kid. I got good grades in school, and I was a really good athlete. And um, I was excited about going into high school. I was all signed up at Sentinel, and I was getting ready to start freshman football. I was going to be in the weight room all summer with the rest of my friends, and because I'd played 4 years a Little Grizzly here, and so I was really excited about starting. And then Grandma, after dinner one day, she dropped the bomb. It was 1972. The war was winding down, and my dad was coming home. And all I knew of him was pictures I'd seen from, field pictures. And to me, he looked dirty and mean, and I didn't want anything to do with him. And neither did my brother. And so what Grandma did is she lied to us. She told us it'd be okay, that we need to be with Dad, that, we could be a family again, and da-da-da. And she said, but it'll be up to us. And if we want it to be, we'll just go for the summer. We can come back, and I can go to Sentinel, and everything will be okay. I found out immediately after getting there, it just was bad right from the beginning. The very first night that Dad came home, we went to dinner at JB's restaurant, the big boy that's been gone for a long time. My brother reached across my dad's plate, and he stabbed him in the hand with a fork. And I mean, it went boing and stuck there, and we had to pull it out. My brother, he lost my brother right there. So we're in Carlisle. We're at the U.S. Army War College. We've been there for a month, and Dad takes us down to the high school and gets me signed up for 9th grade, and then he goes to the intermediate. Well, it was a different system there. 9 and 10 were intermediate, and 11 and 12 were senior. And so he went to an elementary school, and he signed him up for 8th grade, and we both realized that we weren't coming back to Missoula. That weekend, I got I was in the right place at the right time. A couple of the older boys came around the swimming pool on post. They asked me if I wanted to join them. I didn't know what we were going to do, but I was absolutely down to do whatever it was that they were going to do. I didn't have any friends. And we got on our bikes, and there was a little cut in the fence, and we got off post, and I got my first joint in tall boy, a 16-ounce Colt 45, warm in the sun, and my first joint, and then someone yelled cops, and I had a pipe in my hand. We got on our bikes, we rode like the wind. It was wonderful. I was just vibrating. That was the most alive I'd felt ever. And my brother started running away, and that was his way of coping. A couple weeks later, I'd turned 15, and I went looking for those guys. And that was a decision that was going to change the entirety of my life. All of a sudden, everything had to change. Boy Scouts wasn't cool, and DeMolay wasn't cool, and Protestant Youth of the Chapel wasn't cool, and my relationships with teachers and coaches and Dad and my brother and my grandparents, everything changed with one decision. And my brother left that weekend. That first time he ran away, he made it to Mississippi from Pennsylvania. He was gone for 4 months. My dad got a call from the sheriff's department in Mississippi, from a small town in Mississippi. They had found him sleeping in a truck that he had broken into. And that would be the pattern of his behavior for the next 4 years. And the pattern of my behavior for the next 4 years was to get loaded every chance I could get. And I was in high school. I couldn't get loaded every day, but I got loaded every chance I could get. I wasn't going to do the running away. Athletics was really important to me, and I was a good student, and I really liked girls, and so my girlfriends were important to me. Sports was important to me, and I just wasn't going to be doing that running away thing. My brother ran away over and over and over. He was gone more of the 4 years than he was home. And that the downer for that was it left me alone with a father who had no idea how to parent, who was incredibly frustrated and taking a lot of heat from his mom and his dad.
Mm-hmm.
And so recenter me.
How did you get back to Missoula and fall in love?
Okay. Dad, there was a little incident. I was working at a little restaurant, and I wasn't directly involved with what had happened, but the manager of the restaurant had asked me if I would be interested in this little scam he had going, which was going to be an insurance scam, and he had a lemon of a recreational vehicle that he wanted torched, and he wanted it to look like an accident, and he had approached me about it, and anyway, somebody else burnt it down. It actually did happen. There was an ensuing investigation. It was a city kid. You know, it's a long story to get to a short end. It's different in the military. They have a criminal defense department, CDI, and they interviewed me after the city police interviewed me. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but they wanted us off the post. At the time, we were living at the U.S. Army War College, which was a really prestigious placement for my dad. He got that for 9 years, almost actually altogether, almost 13 years of continuous service in Vietnam. So it was a pretty plush posting for a sergeant major, and they removed that from him, basically because of the trouble I'd gotten into. His next duty assignment was at the U.S. Army, or was at he was commandant of the ROTC unit at MSU.
Mm.
And so we moved to Bozeman and that was just right when I was entering my senior year of high school. I stayed. My brother ran away again. I stayed because I really wanted to finish I really wanted a college scholarship for football, and I stayed so I could play football. And it was Bozeman's second year at AA, and we ended up going all the way. We lost one game, went all the way to the state championship, lost to CMR 36-12. I got an all-state honorable mention at cornerback. I didn't really get any. Nobody came after me or anything like that. But the ROTC unit and the prospect of walking on at MSU was looking pretty good, and I really wish things had gone different, because the two main guys that I played football with and was buddies with, they both ended up being captains on the Bobcats on their first national title win. So I could have been part of that. But what happened was we got a call from about 11 o'clock one night. It was a Friday night. We got a call from my dad's girlfriend, and she was giving us a heads up that he was on his way home, and he was absolutely in a rage. And he'd found a lot of pipes, he'd found papers, he'd found a lot of things over the years, but he'd never actually gotten a hold of the weed. And he was mad. And she was afraid for what might happen to me and my brother, so she gave us a heads up. We both packed up. Both packed up ski boot bags, because I used to be a ski racer too. We both packed up the biggest bags we could find. We crawled up on top of the school building at Bozeman's high school, and we actually lived there for about 6 weeks in the middle of winter on top of the school. We kind of put a tarp over an big exhaust panel. A little bit of warm air came out of it, and we lived up there took showers in the school, and we lived up there until I stole a Volkswagen, and I just got sick of being cold, and I went out, I hopped off the building one day and went and stole a Volkswagen. Somebody left their key in an old red Volkswagen, and I swiped it, pulled up, yelled at Richard. He came down off the building. We threw everything in the car, headed to Missoula. My brother stayed in Missoula. Ditched the car, obviously. My brother stayed in Missoula. I went back to Bozeman. I had a job, and I had a girlfriend. And my thought was that I'd only missed a few weeks. And my thought was that I'd re-enter high school. That's not what happened. Dad had everybody out looking for us, and it just wasn't sustainable. So I left.
Tell us how you met Cindy and Gabe.
Well, I went to Oklahoma City. I had a little slip of paper in my wallet. It said 210 Northwest 83rd. And that was when I was in 8th grade, that was on a envelope from a Christmas or birthday card. And it was my mom's address. And I didn't know if she still lived there or not. I hadn't talked to her since then, since 8th grade. And I didn't have anything else to do. My girlfriend was AWOL from the Air Force. She'd signed up on the delayed entry program and decided she didn't want to go. We stopped at the Humane Society, got a couple puppies, and because puppies fix everything, and we headed for Oklahoma. And so I got to meet my mom. Hated it there. Stayed for a year. I just wanted to know who my mom was. The Air Force caught up with Shauna. That was the end of her. I didn't have no place else to go, so I came home. I caught my first felony when I was 18 years old for some burglaries. I got a 3-year deferred. I did 160 days in the old courthouse. I got Judge Wheelis gave me a 3-year deferred on December 21st, 1978. And I got out and was right within a week. I was doing all the same shit that I was doing before, and I knew where it was going. And I needed to be married. I had a moment of clarity, and I spent every night. I mean, I was enrolled at the university. I got my GED. I was enrolled at the university, and I had a dorm room, but I wasn't going. I never made it to a single class. I was at the trading post every night, and my favorite barmaid was Cindy. She smiled at me every night, and it was really good. And we didn't really talk. We didn't really know each other or anything like that, but I always sat in her section, and she always took really good care of me. One Saturday night, me and my best friend, his girlfriend, and my girlfriend, we went down to the Rustic Hut to do something different, to do some country dancing instead of rock and roll. And Cindy and her girlfriend, Cindy always worked Saturday night, so I was really surprised to see her at the Rustic Hut. And her girlfriend decided to do something different too, and she called in sick. And she was at the Rustic Hut. My girlfriend and Mark's girlfriend went out, I think, to smoke a joint, but I don't really know what happened. I know that they were gone. I asked Cindy to dance. We did 2 fast songs, and then they played a slow song. Halfway through the slow song, I gave her a kiss, and she backed up and tilted her head to one side, and then we had to figure out what we were going to do with my girlfriend. It was a really long drive back to Missoula. She screamed the whole way, "Why are you doing this?" And she was throwing stuff and hitting me. And I sat up in front with Cindy, and Mark was driving, and Mark's girlfriend sat in the back and tried to comfort Joni, and we dropped her off at home. And it was 14 years before I spent a night away from Cindy.
So let's jump to the head. So how did the violence start? Tell us a little bit about that.
The early part of our marriage was really good. I think it's a miracle it was as good as it was, knowing what I know now about ACEs and dysfunctional families and all of that kind of stuff. There wasn't much for violence. There were small things that that I didn't know were red flags in, but I know definitely they're red flags now. A push, a shove, if she was backseat driving in the front seat with me or something like that, and she just wouldn't can it or something like that, I might squeeze her leg. And there's nothing really over the top. But I'd get really irritated with her. And I'm going to use the words, and I know it's wrong, but I'm going to say it anyway. Here's what I knew about my wife. She didn't have an off button. She still doesn't have an off button. And I always thought that that's where the permission came for me to put, to do the off thing for her. Right. And I think that's the thing that I used to justify that kind of behavior for a really long time.
Yeah, our society's
And
taught
she
us
was
that.
proud of not having an off button.
Yeah.
She still is, because she always knew that part wasn't her responsibility. I'm responsible for my actions. I don't get to blame it on her. Right. So then, I took a job as a salesman for a big West Coast company. We moved to Spokane. It was really, the first 10 years were really good. I was a good provider and a really good father. And it was all good. What happened was I had 2 rounds of cancer really quick. I had testicular cancer in 1884. And it's nothing to feel sorry for. The operation was a complete success. Every bit of it was gotten. But I even got to keep a little piece. and so I didn't have to do chemo. Right? Huge break. Right? 3 years later, I'm on the table again, and this time they're gutting my face. They took from the top of my ear all the way across to my Adam's apple, and it was so involved. There were so many tumors, and it was so involved that they just gutted my face. They took the sweat glands and saliva glands and everything out of this side of my face. And when the doctor came into the room, he said, in the recovery room, he said, "I just talked to your boss. He tells me you're really good at what you do." And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Do you like doing what you do?" And I said, "I love doing what I do." And he says, "You've been on the table twice. You're not even 30 years old. You might want to think about doing something less stressful with your life. This is not kind to you." And I heard him. I had 42 staples running across my neck. And I heard him. And I quit that job. And me and Cindy moved back to Missoula. I was unemployed for a while. I got in really good physical shape and climbing and riding bikes and stuff like that. And, I healed up really good. And I took a job at Flippers as a night manager at Flippers Casino. Gambling, machine gambling, it was legalized in '88. And it was a nice fit. I'm a real good people person. And I actually kind of enjoyed the work. It was a happening spot. There was only 2 casinos in town. One was Flippers and one was the Ox. And most people like Flippers better. It was 24/7 live poker on 2 tables every single night, all day long. Live keno callers. That cage was a busy cage, and I enjoyed what I was doing. One night I had a girl hit really big. She hit big twice. She left the place with $1,600 in her wallet, and she didn't tip me. And I was none too thrilled about that, because I'd been giving her free beer for a long time. She came back in later that night, and she took a cigarette the last cigarette out of a pack of Marlboros, and she crumpled it up, and she reached through my cage, the little opening in the cage, and she threw it in my garbage basket. And she said, "When it gets quiet in here, you'll want to look in there." So I did. It was a bag of white powder. I thought it was cocaine. I love cocaine. I did a big line of it, and it burned the crap out of my nose. And I looked over at her, and she starts laughing. And I said, "What was that?" And she said, "That would be methamphetamine." I had a 12-year run with the needle. That was what was ahead for me, And as the deeper I went into that, is really when the violence started to escalate.
You kind of had
There's
a peak.
couple really key things. What happened was I got a big habit really quick, and there was only one way to sustain that habit, and that was to deal it. And so, it was really only a couple weeks, of setup, and then pretty soon there was more dope going over that counter than there was quarters. I kept the job for another 2 years, but that was the last full-time employment I had until 2002. Was for 92 is when I left Flippers, and I didn't have another full-time job until 2002, at the pre-release, coming out of prison in treatment. Before that, the first time I ever hit my wife with a closed fist, was in 1997, and we were having an argument, and my ability to match any kind of calamity with serenity was completely gone. I don't know what she said. I don't know what we were fighting about, but I needed her to shut up, and so I shut her up. I knocked out one of her front teeth. She was a waitress. I had never done that before. I was mortified of what I'd just done. I couldn't believe that I had knocked one of her front teeth out. She called a friend who was abused constantly, and her friend told her to super glue the tooth back in her mouth, that it would hold. And that's what she did. She put a drop of super glue on the root, stuck it back in her mouth, and went to work. And when she came back from work, I was falling all over myself, promising that would never happen again. I might as well have promised her I'd grow wings and flap around the room. I didn't have the ability to make good on that promise, but I was the only one that didn't know. I'd never hit her before, so she thought I could. So there was never an issue about not taking me back or something like that, right?
Well, yeah.
And so then, a year later was the big one, the one that separated us, Again, I don't know what the fight was about. I have no idea. What I know about that night was I'd been up for 5 days. I was really tired. I wasn't in the mood for any of this crap, and she wasn't going to let it go. She was really unhappy with what was going on in her life, and she was really unhappy with the. I do remember saying, "Why do you always got to do this shit when I'm high?" And her saying, "You're always high." And then that was the last thing I remember her saying. She headed for our bedroom, and I was right on her tail, and on the way past the nightstand, past the bed, I reached in and I had a little 25 automatic that I just kept in the bedstand. I had a lot of other guns, but that's the one that stayed in the bedstand. What her and my kids always knew about my guns is that they were always loaded. She's not a gun aficionado. There's some stuff she didn't know, and I took advantage of that. It was a little cheap 25 automatic throwaway gun. That's why it was in the drawer. I'm a drug dealer. I don't know if I'm going to need to use that, but it doesn't have a serial number, and it's a throwaway. So that's why it was there. But it was a hammerless, right? So I didn't keep one in the chamber on that gun, right? It was just a double action squeeze and no hammer. If that pin was out, it could go off, and you couldn't have one in the chamber without that pin being out. And I didn't trust the safety in it. So she didn't know that there wasn't one in the chamber. And that's really important, because as I was pushing her to the bathroom, I dropped the clip. She didn't see me drop the clip, right? So I've got her jacked up against the shower in the master bedroom, and I've got my hand like that, and I've got her feet almost off the ground, and I put it, I did this and then jacked her up. So in her mind, this was it. And I put it right on her temple and pulled the trigger. And the next half a second is just really hard to describe, because you think you know some stuff and then you find out you don't know some stuff. I couldn't hold her weight, but I had never felt a human lose all their legs all in one motion. She just hit the deck. She fell out of my hands so fast. I threw the gun, I'm waiting for her to make a sound, and it was like 5 minutes before she could even start crying, because she couldn't breathe. I turned around and walked out. You know, I spent the better part of the next year living in motels, you know, and running with girls that was so disrespectful.
So where are you now?
Where am I now?
Mm-hmm.
God, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I was thinking, you know, as he was talking about his timeout plan, I was thinking me and Cindy have had a timeout plan in place since 2002, and we've never had to use it. You know, I thought I got out of prison treatment and pre-release, and I came home and I thought everything was going to be good. I thought all that shit was behind me, and that's where I was really confused, because what happened is pretty quick after I got out, everything started to escalate again. I still didn't have all the answers I needed. I didn't have a solution for my selfishness. There's a lot of shit I didn't have solution for, but I didn't know that. And so as it started to work its way up to the same kind of bullshit, you know, I sought help and I started going to programs. See, I thought, as was kind of expressed earlier, I thought I always, my whole adult life, I thought if I could ever get the booze and the drugs off of me, that this fucking violent shit would stop. I thought that that's what caused it, and that wasn't the truth. The truth was, it started really early with a dysfunctional childhood and a fucking bus ride. That's what started it, and a distrust for adults that I carried my whole life. And I didn't have tools for those kinds of things. And so over the course of the next couple of years, you know, I threw myself into treatment and I stayed there. I spent 3 years working with a counselor, with an addictions counselor, and with a codependence counselor. I do AA, I do NA, I do ACA. I work those programs hard, and I sponsor people in them, and I'm sponsored in them. And what happened was I got solution for my life problems. And I don't have to act out that way anymore.
You're still with Cindy?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we just celebrated 39 years. I have a really good life. I have a really, really good life. I get so much more than I deserve.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
That was fast at the end. We did it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks, John. Feels good. Oh, yeah. Let's go.
So real quick on timeouts, I want to talk about them again. Is right? We got to own our feelings. We got to agree with our partner that we're mutually like engaged in that process. We control us taking the timeout. We don't control them taking a timeout. Okay. So we have to honor that. We can't say you have to go take a timeout. It's us. We own our shit, not vice versa. Okay. We have to agree to return. Again, the rules of engagement. We have to agree to come back into the relationship and resolve it, because timeouts aren't a cure. Timeouts are like a Band-Aid. They're like an anti-asshole head up butt pill. You guys follow me on that? They're not going to fix it. They're just going to keep you from putting your head. How long the timeouts are, again, you talk about that ahead of time. Okay? So hopefully you guys have a tool to walk out of here with. Again, practicing healthy relationships, or continue practicing. Does that make sense? That's all I got. Thanks.